Dear participants and guests, we're continuing with our conference and with the second panel discussion, Integral Human Development and Education for Moral Agency, in which top leaders of the Ukrainian Catholic University will share their ideas and their insights how academia can respond on the most crucial challenges of nowadays. And I would like to give a floor to moderator of this panel, Sophia Opatska, the founding dean, the chairwoman of the Supervisory Board of Lviv Business School of the Ukrainian Catholic University, Vice-Rector for Academic Affairs of the Ukrainian Catholic University. Sophia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oksana. Welcome to our panel discussion. Well, I would like to say in the beginning that February I'm sorry. That's a good start of the panel discussion in the technological age. I think that's one of the most popular beginnings. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? Well, thank you for being patient. I would like to start our panel discussion maybe with a short notice how usually February looks like at the Ukrainian Catholic University. There is great faculty of social science, and they become the central point of the university usually in February, in the end of February, because that's the third year when they organize wonderful conference, Integral Human Development in the digital age. And every year we get new insights, we get new speakers, and we get new partners, and we are very glad that this year conference became really, really global. This panel is being prepared by Ukrainian Catholic University, and I will be speaking with the prominent philosophers of this university and prominent public figures. As you might have guessed, my background is in business and is very practical. Some people would say even pragmatic. So I will try to challenge my colleagues, if I may say so, to bring their philosophical thoughts and insights into more everyday life and how we can take it and actually change our world for better. So allow me to introduce Myroslav Marynovych, who is on my right, who is Vice-Rector for Mission in our university. I really don't know any other university where you have Vice-Rector for Mission. And Myroslav would probably say whatever it means, but for us it means that we really care about our mission, our culture. And one of the very important responsibilities for Myroslav is to really cherish that and help us stay with our values. Also on my right is Orysya Bila. She is head of philosophical department of our university. And I must say that sometimes I'm a little bit scared of philosophy, but when I look at Orysya, I think anybody can understand philosophy in the way how she explains that. For example, recently there was wonderful video on YouTube about human dignity. So I invite everybody to watch that video and you will be for sure thinking like me. On my left, there is Volodymyr Turchynovskyy. As you probably understood, he is the major driver of this whole conference, and he's putting lots of people in his bus and drives it. And he's also Dean of the Faculty of Social Science. And the last but not least is first Vice-Rector of Ukrainian Catholic University, Dobko, who is also a philosopher, but also he wrote a lot of papers about happiness. So once again, philosophy is not scary. It can be very practical. Everybody wants to be happy in times of COVID, especially. So let's start. I would like to invite Myroslav Marynovych to be the first one to open our floor and discussion. And I would like to ask Myroslav to talk a little bit about context in which we are not only political or economic, but also from the point of view of values. You have been actually punished very, I would say, strictly when you had to spend 10 years in Soviet camps because of values. So how does it look in 2021 to see how values are developing in our society? And I mean society, not only Ukrainian, but society globally. You're welcome.
Thank you. The panelists, the participants, first of all, let me introduce you to the context of the Ukrainian situation from the point of view of values. Today, Ukraine has to overcome two challenges at the same time, post-communist and hopefully, postmodern. Speaking of the communist past, I sometimes use a rather risky phrase. The greatest victims of communism were not those who perished, but those who survived. To survive, they had to radically change their ethical basis. The communist system was not without any morality. It just shifted aside the previous absolute morals, which were normal for the Christian perspective, Christian paradigm, into the Bolshevik formula: the moral is what is useful for the proletariat. After the collapse of communism, the system of values has not automatically returned to the Christian one. We found ourselves in a typical postmodern situation of relativism with its formula: the moral is what is useful for me. So now we have to deal with the consequences of that. Too many of post-Soviet politicians benefit politically and financially from the post-Soviet disorder and try to preserve that disorder ad calendas grecas. Soviet disorder and the court system has become the instrument of the so-called selective justice, that is, setting accounts with political rivals. Mass corruption undermines the chances of the nation to reform the political and economic orders. Paternalistic stereotypes and instincts are still very powerful to make corruption a preferred way of the Ukrainian style of business as usual. Our task as a Catholic university is absolutely clear: to promote restoration of the valid system of values. What we need is human freedom combined with personal responsibility. Our hope may be expressed by the logo of the year 2012 conference in Madrid I took part in, that is, the forces that change the world are the same that change the human heart. That's why we want our people to do what the Eastern Christian liturgy calls them to do: elevate your hearts. This is, be sure that living honestly doesn't mean becoming a loser. However, the consequences of the communist deprivation of freedom for the sake of dogmatized ideology are not the only challenges we have to overcome. Ukraine faces also the consequences of moral relativism caused by the postmodern misusage of freedom. How to distinguish the truth among the many faces of lies today. The multiplication of alternative truths undermines the ability of governments to make right decisions. The new realities brought old shortcomings back from the abyss. In today's world, authoritarian ideas have become popular again. Governments are tainted with the logic of national selfishness. We face the chain reaction of hatred that infects more and more people. Violence is increasingly presenting itself as the only way to stop evil. To stop these dangerous trends is too much for a single nation alone. There is a great need to conceptually reload the fundamental ideas underlying human civilization. And values-based universities can play an important role here, as, for example, our conference today. This task requires intellectual platforms that could become crucibles for nurturing new ideas. Again, Ukrainian Catholic University can and should become one of such platforms, as the freedom of intellectual search and intellectual inquiry, disciplined by ethical principles, is the core of its mission. We need to get out of the fog of the lowlands, to see the higher ground, the peaks of great ideas. The latter must again attract us with their magnetism and inspire confidence in them. So it might happen the solutions that our university offers to Ukraine may be important for the whole world as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Myroslav. I will come back with more questions to you later on. But thank you for these opening remarks, because in some way they maybe take a lot from the what have been talked about in the previous panel, where we had a lot of people from business talking about very concrete, specific challenges of the last year, and you have been able, to put this into different perspective of the global world and global thinking, and of those challenges of thinking, and our sometimes I might even say some kind of paradigm questions which every one of us as a human being is facing, but also we as a the whole society are facing. So the name of our panel is Integral Human Development and Education for Moral Agency. And now I would like to start unfold this name, because we have pretty complicating how to say it, notions in it, and we have to put them somehow together. So I would like Volodymyr to talk a little bit about did integral human development an approach to that, and we as human creatures in this process, did we change in last year? Are we talking differently about integral human development today than we did 2 or 3 years ago? And you should know, because you run this conference. So you should have this memory of how we do it.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. I just want to begin by saying that you look wonderful among philosophers and public thinkers. Doesn't seem to be scared much. I want us to think about the future. We constantly define our future by choosing a certain preferred course of action. In a world of management, we conveniently would think that our preferred course of action is defined by our vision of the future and a set of goals we want to achieve. Essentially, we have 2 types of questions which relate us to our future accomplishments. These are how and why questions, namely how to achieve our vision and why shall we pursue this particular vision of ours. Both are very important questions, but of a different character though. The how question reflects our technological mentality, focused on finding ways to get something done, produced, or fixed. The second one, the why question, is about meanings, values, and principles, and therefore it implies certain moral vision along with it, which helps to frame an answer we are looking for. Amazing technologies we have at our disposal now is a great illustration how advanced we might be in answering how questions. Think of the last week NASA rover Perseverance landing on the red planet after a 300 million mile journey. At the same time, the social and political insecurity, instability, and mounting uncertainties we observe globally clearly illustrate that we are not as great in asking and answering why questions. I think there's a great deal of confusion, misunderstanding, disrespect of facts and truths, dishonesty and populism, which blurs our understanding of and undermines our sensitivity for the social and civic matters and values. Think of the recent violent protests in DC, or a war launched by Russia against Ukraine, or you can easily make your own pick. However, sadly, we have an abundantly rich collection of cases to choose from. My today's proposal to our audience is to let us engage ourselves in thinking about the future. I suggest that we do so not so much by having a kind of strategy session, but rather by activating our discernment capacity. This is especially so since the time of crisis is always a right time to think about what is important. It's a proper time to ask ourselves about the values, virtues, and principles. To discern our path to the future, we should be able to articulate some guiding principles. I think this is how we discern our why questions and begin to unpack the answers. One of the core intuitions underlying our conference is mentioned at the very top of the conference webpage. It says, in a time of widespread isolation, let's talk about how to build better societies with the spirit of solidarity. The COVID crisis has manifested our vulnerability as humankind on a global scale. It has revealed not only how vulnerable we are from the public health viewpoint, but it has also revealed how fragile and insecure we are when it comes to the quality of our social fabric. Francis, in his Let Us Dream, written along with Austin Ivory, writes that, quote, COVID has unmasked the other pandemic, the virus of indifference, which is the result of constantly looking away, telling ourselves that because there is no immediate or magic solution, it is better not to feel anything, end quote. We do hope that vaccination would allow us to combat COVID virus, or at least to minimize its impact. Yet, when it comes to the virus of indifference, the only way to develop and sustain a kind of spiritual immunity to it is to live our lives in the spirit of solidarity. Solidarity is neither a skill, nor a method, nor a kind of social technique, which once being mastered and practiced would allow us to fix or prevent social problems and challenges. Solidarity's first motion isn't about fixing something, it's about caring for somebody. Solidarity wouldn't be what it should be without acknowledgement of our mutual dependency. When it comes to understanding our human condition, I believe that interdependency is a richer concept if contrasted with the idea of personal independence. I think we often tend to understand our independence in a purely transactional terms. I'm not sure how accurate would be my following example, and yet I would dare to assume that our children at some point might experience a desire for more and more independence because, in their minds, becoming independent would allow them, as they might imagine, not to be dependent anymore on everything being given to them as a gift. It may look so much better when you can get what you want through some kind of a transaction without a need of stepping into a gift relationship. The parents, in the eyes of a child, may be perceived so much more independent because they can allow themselves to be transactional and thus independent in their adult lives. By the way, I think we can detect a similar kind of motivation in the prodigal son parable. Even if we are willing to acknowledge our dependence, more often than not, we would start looking for some ways to liberate ourselves from it. We constantly practice this kind of liberation by which we are trying to make ourselves free from God, other human beings, history, culture, and eventually and paradoxically from our own selves. Is there a path of liberation which acknowledges a deeper meaning, an opportunity in our human condition of dependency, other than overcoming it by self-separation, isolation, or even negation of others? Notre Dame professor Carter Snead, in one of his recent articles, makes a reference to the British philosopher Roger Scruton's profound insight that, quote, "Our field of obligation is wider than the field of choice." Our field of obligation is wider than the field of choice. From an individualistic viewpoint, which is about maximizing field of choice and minimizing dependency, this is an impossible and terrifying statement. Shouldn't we think of a liberation and liberty as grounded in solidarity? Shouldn't we think of ourselves as being invited to enter into a gift economy, wherein a gift isn't conditioned by return on investment calculations? We are indeed bound by a gift given to us, but not in the sense of having an obligation to pay it back, but rather in the sense of being called to establish a relationship of gratitude. Thus, gratitude becomes a source and a force of liberation, a liberation which is profoundly relational and community-oriented in this case. My own discernment exercise suggests that we live in the time at which we cannot assume that academic reflection and technological rationality only can guarantee us the future we all wish to deserve. I believe we do need a power of moral imagination and a courage for moral agency to build a future respectful of human dignity and common good. Moral imagination isn't only about acknowledging certain realities, phenomena, or facts, such as dependency, wars, hungers, poverties, migrations, etc., but it enables one to see himself or herself in the dependent child, the disabled, the elderly, the poor, the refugee, the suffering, the dying. Moral imagination is also about seeing my personal life as a history of unconditional gifts already given and still to be given to me in the future. I find it helpful to think of the concept of integral human development as a process or as a path of becoming the kind of people who are capable of making the good of others their own, meaning that the good of others becomes our own intention, motivation, dedication, struggle, and if needed, a sacrifice. This is not a transactional attitude of keeping my own balance while self-making myself into a success of my own kind. I conclude by asking the following question: how can our universities become places and communities at which moral imagination, courage, and moral agency are awakened and nourished? Thank you.
I have so many questions, but I am afraid if I start to ask them and we start discussion, neither Orysya nor Taras will have a chance to talk. So I invite kindly Orysya now. My question would be, Orysya, to you, moral agents. So we have in the name integral human development and education for moral agency. Are we happy with number of people who can be named moral agents? Do we need more of such people? It's often said that speed of changes in the society are defined not by majority but by minority. The direction of changes defined by minority, but speed is defined by majority. So tell us more about this part of the name of the panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, we need to...
We have some suggestions how to be more helpful to our participants.
Okay, the title of my paper is Courage to Tell the Truth as the Courage to Transform the World. So we talked today about moral agency, and I would like to start from far away, but to start to understand the situation now, I will start from 60s. Half a century ago, a French philosopher, Michel Foucault, raised one of the most important issues of our time. That is relation between power and knowledge. According to Foucault, the modern situation is a situation of influence and interaction of numerous anonymous forces, in a plexus of which a modern subject is formed. Human freedom and autonomy are nothing more than illusions. We, our preferences, our behavior, our thinking, says Foucault, are the products of the influence of many big players, whose faces are hardly familiar to us. And to be honest, it's doubtful whether they have a faith in a usual sense in which we're accustomed. These are not individual influential people or even the boards of directors of large corporations, not even the Bill Gates. The forces that shape our existence are random, irrational, and often invisible until we are confronted with the results of their influence. Their number is a legion, as the evangelist Luke would say, and they are woven into amazing and bizarre combinations. One of these we can see today under the name pandemic COVID-19. And here I would like to point out that in any way, I do not deny the existence and threat of the disease with which we are now dealing in the world. People who suffer and die as a result of the disease are the most reliable and saddest confirmation of its reality. However, I would like to focus on another aspect of the pandemic, its social, political, economic, and cultural manifestations. The situation with the virus has served as a starting point, launching a number of rather complex and often problematic social processes. We do not know whether we are doomed to such a development, that is, whether there was an acceleration of events that were to occur as a result of previously established circumstances, or the current situation is a completely new situation that is the result of the game of blind forces, so to say, so-called black swan, as Nassim Taleb would say, right? But in an attempt to understand what is happening, we are passionately looking for information. Fortunately, in today's world, there is enough information, and sometimes too much. Much of modern industry focuses on the production and transmission of information. The downside of the medal is that although there is a lot of information, it is often contradictory. Statistics on the same issues are interpreted differently, and the results are transformed into completely different strategies of dealing with the situation. Emotionally charged news inclined the audience to take certain sides. As a result, we experience a lack of meaning in the data stream. Instead of helping us to understand the world, it complicates or even obscures one's vision of the future. Modern people are left with a feeling of permanent information chaos, which in turn blocks the formation of an adequate response to the challenges of reality and results in growing public frustration, mistrust, and aggression. Thank you. In the spring of 2020, a new social network, Clubhouse, was launched. Today, we are witnessing a real excitement in the desire to join it. Since the demand is high, and to join the network, one needs an invitation from its actual participants, the market price is skyrocketing from $12 to $150 for an invite. The price, of course, is the marketing question. However, there is such a great demand on another social network. Why? Are we really short on information? Or maybe the answer is to be sought somewhere else. Medium is the message, wrote Marshall McLuhan. The audio format of the network makes it convenient for users with wireless headphones. Its capacity to provide information here and now without the slightest delay is an extremely attractive proposal of information capitalism, especially when social influencers like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, or Oprah also join the game. However, the real uniqueness of Clubhouse is in its possibility, even if only hypothetical, of free speech. Clubhouse is a new virtual agora, where everyone can be heard here and now. Is it really important in the modern democratic world to have one more place to speak out? Do we really lack freedom of expression? To understand the answer to this question, I will return to Michel Foucault. After devoting most of his life to the study of modernity and the question of how the Western world became what it is now, Foucault came to the conclusion that the modern subject is not an autonomous subject at all, speaking in the language of philosophy. He does not take active part in self-creation and is the result of numerous anonymous powers outside of himself. The subject is in the classical sense. The subject in the classical sense as an active agent is fiction. Foucault introduces the term governmentality to describe techniques and strategies for governing society. The idea of governing is understood by the philosopher to be more broad than political government and includes a variety of control techniques over society. One of the simplest examples of governmentality techniques is fake surveillance cameras in stores and restaurants that are installed to regulate potential destructive customer behavior. Another example are algorithms that are used by large search engines like Google or social networks that make us to select certain content, offer certain advertisement, and help us finding friends. The subject, thus, is sculpted by institutions, social relations, the game of blind forces. The place where these anonymous forces exercise their power is body and mind. For example, large corporations like Facebook have successfully learned to use algorithms for sales. We know many examples of that. However, they sell not only goods, but also political preferences. We remember the high-profile case of Cambridge Analytica that collected psychological profiles of network users for election manipulation in the US and the Brexit referendum in the UK. It seems that humanity as we knew it is a thing of the past. The time has come for a generation of controlled and forgivable Homo sapiens whose behavior can be calculated and directed. Foucault and many intellectuals of his generation, just like today, did not agree to this state of things. The last few years of his life he spent studying the phenomenon of an ancient concept of Paresia, which he believed could help him to find an answer to the situation. The Greek word Paresia means the courage to tell the truth. It's an opportunity for free speech, which is embedded in the very idea of democracy. It's not simply a right to speak publicly, but a moral duty for the sake of others. The one who uses Paresia, the Paresiast, is someone who says everything he has in mind. He does not hide anything, but opens his heart and mind completely to other people through his discourse. This is the type of speech that results in a transformation of reality. In the history of the ancient world, Foucault distinguishes three types of Paresia. The first, democratic, is the courage to tell the truth to one's fellow citizens. He who speaks always risks. In times, the price of his truth-telling is his own life. But since the goal of the Paresiast is the well-being of the polis, he does it out of a sense of duty. The second type is autocratic Paresia. A Paresiast is a sage from the tyrants in entourage, who bravely turns to him to open his eyes to the current state of affairs. He also risks, because the tyrant can always listen to his followers and execute the truth teller. Finally, the third type is a cynical Paresia. It's called after the name of the Cynics, a school of ancient Greek philosophers. For cynics, speaking the truth is impossible without the practice of truth. To speak the truth is to live, and to live it requires great courage, because it's life in spite of threats and disadvantages. Paresia becomes a manifestation of self, but not a selfish bulge, but a means of active self-creation. If our dominant social institutions, our culture, are just a combination of coincidences, a result of interplay of anonymous forces, then we have no other way to master the situation other than become one of those active principles that form a new discourse, violate established rules of the game, and set new ones. Paresia, as the courage to tell the truth, is epithemeleia, the care of the self. In this sense, the first Christian martyrs and ascetics were also Paresiasts, who testified their beliefs through their lifestyles. The cynic and Christian asceticism is a logical consequence of the Paresiast attitude. The discourse of faith is integrated into the practice of life and cannot be considered in isolation from it. And here I would like to quote John, the first chapter. "And the Word has become flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth." Now I want to go back to the clubhouse. Clubhouse doesn't waste your time sharing any unnecessary information, says the app developers. The goal of the Clubhouse is sharing constructive conversations, a direct language that will open visions of the future, the biggest deficit of the present, as we already mentioned here. A social network based on the principles of direct speech hits the heart of the global crisis. It promises to form a true picture of the world, to speak freely, to tell the truth, to explain what's happening, what this world is like, and how we should act in it. This is the promise of Clubhouse. The evident problem of the growing number of the Clubhouse users is not to get lost in this broadcast bazaar, because the very opportunities to speak publicly does not mean that the majority cannot be wrong. It does not protect against the uncritical assimilation of other people's views, and is quite problematic, especially for a large group of people. The Greek called this practice of speech isegoria, equality of all in freedom of speech. Unlike Paresia, it was not a matter of honor, it does not involve risks, and it does not follow from the obligation to tell the truth. The potential of Clubhouse is huge, but the disadvantages are very obvious. Thus, the question of the locus of Paresia remains open. Can we offer such conditions where it will be nurtured as a value of democratic world? What conditions are required for this? Let me offer just 5 questions that will help us to search for this big question. First of all, the democratic agora is a place of fellow citizens. The birthplace of truth, as we know it, since the times of Socrates, is an interpersonal space that requires not so much of geographical dimension, but an interpersonal one, to be present and ready to listen and respond. Second, the place of Paresia is a place of fostering values. It's possible only as an act of bringing up something that matters. Thus, the locus of Paresia presupposes a set of basic values shared by the community. Third, the locus of Paresia is a place of openness to an honest honest analysis of the situation. This means cultivating critical and analytical thinking, the ability to notice details and to think integrally. And finally, the locus of Paresia is the place of courage. It's important to provide a space where one can openly go against the established order if required. This means that the community must cultivate the virtue of courage and be prepared for critical voices even inside of it. And finally, the place of Paresia is a place of practice. Because speaking the truth is not possible without the practice of truth. Paresia does not make sense if it does not transform reality for the better. The question that I would like here to leave for reflection in today's conference is the following. Are Catholic universities ready to be a place of Paresia for our societies? Are we the free land where one can think and speak freely, where asceticism becomes possible, the practice of exercising oneself in truth? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Orysya. I think we learned a lot from your speech, I guess this is one of the purposes here. And I think I have to be very humble and just address your question to Taras, because this is exactly the goal of the panel, to understand, can Catholic universities play a role in development of integral human development? Can it be developed? I'm sure you have some good answers to that. And while you are preparing, I would like to say that we are also very glad that we are not the only university looking for those answers, but there are great partners who are partners, sorry for saying it once again, but we are truly happy that we have such great partners in this conference from Italy and from United States, and we hope that it will give us even broader perspective. So you're welcome.
So thank you, Sophia. All of these are great questions. So I don't think I will be able to answer all of them, but perhaps at least some. So the title of my presentation is Catholic Universities and Integral Human Development. So basically, there are two things which most clearly to my mind, distinguish Catholic universities from their secular peers. The first is their explicit commitment to the holistic development of their students, and secondly, their appreciation of the community. So Catholic universities aim at educating the whole person, thus endorsing Pope Francis' statement, I quote, that educating is not only filling the head with concepts, but teaching how to use the three languages, the language of the mind, the language of the heart, and the language of the hand. Catholic universities celebrate a communal way of life, foster commitment to the common good, and prepare students for service in their communities. In other words, any Catholic university, by its very nature, follows a philosophy of integral human development to some extent. But of course, any single Catholic university could do it more or less intentionally, more or less creatively, more or less successfully. If we take an example of Notre Dame's Keough School of Global Affairs, it has adopted the promotion of integral human development as its overarching framework that gives a distinct and articulate shape to the school's academic life and profile. In September 2020, the Ukrainian Catholic University launched its new strategy 2025, named A Serving University. Education today is more than preservation, transfer, or production of knowledge. It is also about the contribution which an educational institution makes to society. UKO is going to measure its success in its new strategy not so much in terms of its quantitative growth, but based on its social impact both locally and globally. And the concept of integral human development fits well both as a goal and a method to advance UKO's vision as a serving university. The historic definition of integral human development we know comes from Pope Paul VI in his encyclical Populorum Progressio. I quote, "Development cannot be restricted to economic growth alone. To be authentic, it must be well-rounded. It must foster the development of each person and of the whole person," end of quote. Basically, the integral human development concept describes a life with dignity. It becomes possible only with the recognition of the multidimensional nature of the human person and the importance of right relationships in a society and with creation. It's about flourishing of the whole person and every person in a just and peaceful society. It is based on the holistic understanding of the human well-being, comprising its economic, social, political, cultural, ecological, and spiritual dimensions. And it is characterized by the commitment to the sacredness of human life and the dignity of the human person in the social, political, economic, and legal arrangements of a society. As our friend Clement Sedmak pointed out, I quote, "The concept can be translated into two imperatives. Don't leave anyone behind, and make sure that each dimension of the person counts," end of quote. So integral human development is employed as a fundamental concept for facing the complex challenges and opportunities involved in the dignified human life and social progress. At this point, it is worth mentioning that a consensus that human development could not be adequately assessed by reference solely to GDP or other economic factors has been gradually constructed in a secular setting as well. Thus, we are well aware of OECD Better Life Index, which acknowledges that there is more to the quality of life than the cold numbers of GDP and economic statistics. We also know about seemingly extravagant attempts like that of the government of Bhutan to substitute Gross National Happiness Index for Gross Domestic Product Index as a measure for assessing public policies and government performance. We also remember a prophetic statement by Robert Kennedy about gross national product measuring, I quote, "everything except that which makes life worthwhile." But perhaps the most prominent attempt to introduce more diversity into the assessment of human welfare was the creation of the United Nations Human Development Index 3 decades ago. It is based on the so-called capabilities approach to development. HDI was intended to assess what makes for a basic quality of life. 3 factors: long and healthy life, education, and a decent standard of living, which is measured by gross national income per capita. In December 2020, UNDP issued its annual Human Development Report entitled The Next Frontier, Human Development and the Anthropocene. The report emphasizes the interconnectedness of the planetary and social imbalances we face. It calls for the reorientation of our approach, I quote, from solving discrete, siloed problems to navigating multidimensional, interconnected, and increasingly universal predicaments, end of quote. So the report is based on the recognition of the complexity of the situation we are dealing with and the insufficiency of looking for isolated solutions to specific problems. So the report introduces the concept of nature-based human development to navigate human flourishing so that it can happen alongside easing planetary pressures. I quote, "The increasingly important questions for many countries are not about the overall size of the pie, but the relative size of its slices. In this year's report, we also worry about the oven," end of quote. The report advances an argument for making equity, innovation, and stewardship of nature central to what it means to live a good life. It puts high on the agenda the eradication of poverty in all its forms. I quote, "a firm commitment not to leave anyone behind in the process," end of quote. Poverty is not attributed here only to those who suffer economic hardships. It is a wider category, with some parallels to many phases of poverty as described in the message of Pope Francis on the first World Day of the Poor in 2017. I quote, "Poverty challenges us daily in phases marked by suffering, marginalization, oppression, violence, torture and imprisonment, war, deprivation of freedom and dignity, ignorance and illiteracy, medical emergencies and shortage of work, trafficking and slavery, exile, extreme poverty, and forced migration. To all these forms of poverty, we must respond with a new vision of life and society," end of quote. Such a human development is an ambitious goal, not easy to achieve. It requires an adequate anthropology, sound moral source, and mature ethical agency as a basis for political action and public engagement. There's a beautiful book by Notre Dame scholar Christian Smith entitled Atheist Overreach. In this book, Christian Smith makes an argument that to ground and sustain commitment to high ethical standards, to ideas and practices that are difficult and costly, like those of universal benevolence or nature-based human development for argument's sake, requires a robust, I quote, narrative that satisfactorily explains to doubters the reality and reasons behind the belief commitments themselves, end of quote. To perceive another person as a brother or a sister, in nature as a home, requires moral strength and spiritual energy, which couldn't be derived from the secular sources alone. It must be a vision of the human person of no less sublimity as that of an image of God. Then it could really nourish fraternity experience or inspire selfless care for nature and creation. Or John Cavadini, another Notre Dame scholar, argues that, I quote, "the preferential option for the poor is a category derived from revelation, and not in the first instance a category of unaided scientific reason. It is not a doctrine that can come from the secular disciplines, not even philosophy," end of quote. The spiritual energy for such an endeavor to promote the common good and contribute to the development of the whole person in each person does not come from nowhere. It implies an awareness that people are not just members of one biological species or bearers of rational consciousness. It is grounded in the understanding that we are daughters and sons of the one Father, from capital F. Such a metanoia is necessary if we want to move beyond shaky social balance of selfish impulses, private financial interests, class antagonisms, tribal complaints and grievances, and power games. This knowledge opens a moral source for the spiritual strength to work hard for this ambitious goal and not to give up when confronted with injustice, animosity, or hatred. Catholic universities could play a unique role in empowering people for ethical agency in the world for the sake of our neighbors and communities. Moral agency based on the evangelical vision of the human person creates a space and momentum for right relationships that are crucial for integral human development. Father David Hollenbach, in his essay on a relational understanding of human development, writes that, I quote, "Advancing human development requires strengthening relationships that bind persons to each other in communities and institutions. Integral human development, therefore, can be seen as the advancement of the whole person and of all persons through their participation in social and institutional relationships that enable them to live with dignity," end of quote. Or as Archbishop Boris Gudziak puts it, I quote, "Our strength resides in relationships, not just in myself or yourself. It grows in between us. It is interpersonal. It is both divine and human. It draws its power from collaboration, solidarity, and making oneself a gift for others," end of quote. It is no wonder that in his message for the launch of the Compact on Education last year, Pope Francis calls for creating a network of human and open relationships. For this, we need a courage to put the person at the center and to form people who are willing to put themselves at the service of their community. In the Instrumentum Laboris, Pope Francis mentions that, I quote, "Service can not only be a training activity among others, but it can become the fundamental method through which all knowledge and skills can be transmitted and acquired." We could point to this process as a development from education to service to education as service, whereby our brethren are both the way and the goal of education, end of quote. Catholic universities invite students to learn to serve, as opposed to "I am great" attitude. In fostering an ethos of integral human development, they offer an alternative to a culture which preaches one's advancement by making others subordinate or suppressing others. We hope that any Catholic university following faithfully its vocation for integral human development could become a life-changing story for young people and enable them to encounter the world and their role in it with joy, responsibility, gratitude, hospitality, spiritual strength, and freedom.
Thank you, Tarase. I have also a number of questions, but I would like to start with a very practical one. I'm sure we have a lot of people from university community, either our university or other universities, communities, watching our stream, and maybe they will be watching the video later on. What does it mean practically? What does it mean for me as a faculty member? What can I do? How can I do it? Do you have any suggestions? What can be done? Or, for example, maybe you can give a couple of examples from Ukrainian Catholic University, because you have mentioned Strategy 2025, and obviously if we are serving university such great ideas, they should find their place in some project.
Thank you, Sophia. So at the beginning, Volodymyr has mentioned already that we, the Ukrainian Catholic University, are launching an integral human development think tank and a program with the generous support from the Porticus Foundation. And, to respond to your question, I would like to briefly describe what this program entails. So, as I mentioned, there are two wings, actually two parts to this integral human development, in which is one is integral human development program and another is a think tank. When we talk about integral human development program, we speak about educating young people as public leaders based on a specific, what we call educational toolbox, which comprises several elements which were very important for us. For example, core curriculum, which is based on Catholic intellectual tradition on the one hand and liberal arts on the other hand. Or for example, church social thought or complexity thinking. Service, we are going to introduce pedagogy of service learning across curriculum in the university. Also, entrepreneurial mindset, which means that our courses or some learning should be project-based or, for example, based on like learning by teaching, let's say, of senior students, by senior students of younger students, and of course, leadership for service. And this program, this educational toolbox actually is represented or should be represented finally in OKU graduate profile, which kind of present this well-rounded graduate with all these skills that are described in the concept of integral human development. And to achieve this, this program will be structured around 4 areas of human capacities, like perception, motivation, reflection, and action. All these are important. All these somehow facilitate each other. This works like a virtuous cycle. But I would like to mention that, as I said, perception, to be able to perceive the problems in the world, to be able to define them in the right way. So it's very important. But students also, before they reflect on these problems, they have to learn the logic of the heart. So to build their motivation. Then comes reflection. In an uncertain world, it's very important for students, for young people, to be able to reflect about this complexity and then chart the course of their action. But of course, we as humans are here in the world to act and change things for the better. So to do it well, we need not only ethical guidance or sharp intelligence, but also leadership to act. Also the entrepreneurial mind to believe that things could be different. I think all of this should be learned by the students. And if you talk about integral human development think tank, of course, as any think tank, it will work on research and build expertise, also producing analytical reports, case studies, continuing development program in integral human development, prepare public intellectual discussions in many other established collaboration network and many other things. But it's important for us at university that it will happen around like 6 clusters, which we call OKU complexity framework, in which comprise promotion of the vision of the ethical nature of all human affairs, mastering technological advancement in the advent of the digital age, learning how to appreciate so-called robot-proof way of life, fostering attitude of care for creation, and mastering skills to pursue a sustainable development agenda, developing a sense for social justice and empathy for marginalized, dispossessed, and displaced, developing appreciation for the common good and community service, and thus meeting challenge of civic alienation and democratic deficit. And finally, we started our panel from this issue of Ukraine's past. I think it's important to reflect on the trauma of communism and its tragic lessons, to make, among other things, the liberal democracy also more immune to the radical leftist social constructivism utopias. So this will be, I think, our task, and where we will think, where we will test, and where we will share.
Thank you. So it looks like that this is not a couple of pages of very nice fancy words, but this is very practical thing which we hope to see in our graduates, and which we hope our graduates will take through their life and will give us feedback how we did our job. And exactly what Orysya said, are we doing well enough as universities, as Catholic universities? So thank you, Tarase. I suggest that we open the floor for the discussion. As I mentioned, I have a number of questions. So we might jump from one speech to another speech, but I also encourage you to challenge each other, because I believe that this conversation and the process of this conversation can bring a lot of meaning, not only for us and reflections, but also for other people. So maybe I will start with you, Volodko, because you have been speaking about solidarity a lot. And Myroslav was talking about paternalism. And I know that very often people mix solidarity with paternalism. I mean, you know, what is yours, it's mine, but what is mine is not for sure yours. How can we bring this notion of solidarity to the society which has post-communist trauma and which actually even 30 years after independence of our country, we still see a lot of, even in young people who never lived in Soviet times, a lot of attitudes which were common in Soviet times. And obviously Soviets had different understanding of solidarity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you about your question. I think that I think that probably my most kind of direct answer would be that I would really associate solidarity with three people. I mean, to me, you simply can't be in that mode and modality of solidarity if you're not like a free person. So I think this is why I think, by the way, during the Soviet time, I mean, the whole kind of paternalistic attitude has emerged, because I mean, the society wasn't really interested at all in educating people for freedom. That was like a different model, different approach. And this is how they kind of managed to educate, I think, most of the people, to the extent that they were thinking, well, I mean, there is someone that is supposed to take care of me. I think that it's not only I mean, I think we could also probably find similar moments, not only in the kind of Soviet style life, but I can also imagine a kind of a tendency, if you look at the kind of Western world, there's something which I can refer to as a kind of outsourcing of responsibility. I mean, if you look at the whole kind of citizenship approach, I think, by the way, that's probably one of the greatest challenges we have now in the Western democracies, is like the idea of civic virtues and values. So which I think it's my kind of responsibility as a citizen to think about my neighbor and think about the common good. Somehow that's also a challenge which we have to overcome here. So to me, I would often think of our university, Catholic University, and our kind of mission in terms of educating people for freedom, or educating free people. Because if you would kind of ask me, kind of what would be the essence, what would be my kind of short answer to this, I would say yes, we're kind of working to educate free people here. And with this comes the whole kind of concept of, I think, solidarity, being able to take responsibility not only for myself, but for someone else. So I would kind of move in that direction, answering your question.
So maybe I will pass the mic to Myroslav and ask how much responsibility comes with freedom, because it looks like that everybody likes freedom part, but nobody cares about responsibility part. And we usually hear what we like to hear, you know, not what we are told, but...
First of all, paternalism means that we delegate our responsibility for our life, our freedom, to somebody else, to the people above. And then we violate our own right to have freedom, to be free. But, you know, to be in freedom means, first of all, to have some time to grow in freedom. And this was the message I heard from Cardinal Huser, who surprised me with that, because I suggested that every person who comes from slavery becomes free immediately. No, it's not the case. And Cardinal Huser told us, some audience, when we spoke about inability of people to be in freedom, to live a responsible life, he told us, let people grow in freedom. It means that they commit mistakes, they fall, but they go up. So that's very important when we speak about freedom.
So maybe this is exactly what we can do also in Catholic universities, help our students grow in freedom with mistakes, with conclusions from these mistakes. But now I would like to ask Orysya. Clubhouse was started not in Ukraine, where we had slavery, where we metaphorical slavery. It was started in very democratic society with free press, with freedom, with responsibility, with possibility to fail, and obviously with many agoras already in place. So why people join Clubhouse so actively? Do they really need agora, or it's a kind of place where they or this is because of frustrations with other institutions we were used to that had a decent role and who did not fulfill their roles? And that was also part of great discussion in the previous panel. Is it frightenness? Why? Why do you think?
I think the answer is really complex, and it's not the single answer that is there. That's for sure. That's what we see. People join for different reasons. Some of them really join to hear or to be able to talk to Elon Musk or somebody famous in their country, or listen to rock stars, or all kind of media stars that join the social network as well. But what I see, one of the things that is really important for Clubhouse is in this information space, we are really lost of senses. We have information, we lack senses. And when we listen to conversations, it's not the information that really is sold in the Clubhouse, but the explanation, how shall we act for the future. It's the vision of the future. It's the discussion of what's happening. So really, people really come there for discussion, for understanding. And that's what I think we really lack in the information age, with the number of different media that really, how to say, they just pour like rivers of information in our ears on a daily basis. We really are lost in senses and the vision of future. One of the things that is really human, that makes difference of a human being from any other creature, is ability. And that's also very interesting that psychologists say that what really makes a child grown up, like a child getting mature, is ability to see to predict the future and also to build the future. And that is really a big problem for our world today. So I think this is a place where people really come with the hope for the image of the future.
So in some sense, Clubhouse, this is like a metaphorical idea that we are searching for answers to the question why, and to not big number of institutions is giving us answer, does not help us to search for this why. So I would like to come back to Volodymyr. You have mentioned about why in your speech, and I think this is something very close to business, because if you look at the business which really has a mission, that's an answer for why. But we know that to look for why is much more difficult than to look for what or how. In any strategic session, it's much easier to generate the number of great projects which we would like to do, but why we do this project? So how we can teach our students, can we teach our students to look for why? Is it possible? Can we develop this attitude in them?
Well, that's That's very I think critical thing. I very much like how nicely it comes together with Myroslav, that's just mentioned, and also Orysya in their responses. I think what they are saying is that we live in time. Time is a critical thing, and this is why we have to grow into freedom somehow. So freedom, that's the kind of calling and vocation of every human person. We are person from the very first moment we are we start to exist, but then to become person is a vocation or a calling. I think that Husserl was Cardinal Husserl was having something like that in mind. You are a human being already, but you have a call to become a human being. So you are free right and now, here and now, but you have to grow into freedom. And I think that this being in time is really very, very critical. And Orysya has just mentioned that it's we find sometimes difficult to think about the future. And I think our horizons of thinking and playing are getting very, very short. I mean, that's something that I think some already has mentioned during the first panel or whatever. We just think in very kind of short spans. That seems to be kind of comfortable. I know what I'm going to do like next minute or next second, or maybe I don't know, I'll just do something. But our condition is that we have to train and educate ourselves to think of our life as a whole. It may last for 10 years or it may last for 110 years. But somehow the trick would be to approach yourself in the kind of wholeness, understanding that you've got the beginning of that life and there will be some kind of end point. And you have to kind of think holistically. And I think educationally, this is really a very important thing, just to set that kind of ability to think long-term. It's not only about long-term thinking, it's about kind of accepting yourself and thinking of yourself kind of long-term. And this is, and the other thing, which let me just quickly kind of comment to this. I think we speak about values pretty often. I think almost everyone has managed somehow that language of values to the point I'm almost kind of starting to feel frightened by this, because what I'm looking for, I'm also looking at discourse about virtues. And honestly, I'm not so much interested what your set of values is. I'm rather more interested whether you are a just person or a good person. I think that's my kind of ultimate question eventually when I'm approaching someone. Are you a good person? Are you a just person? Are you a merciful person? And then, because that's the trick. I mean, then again, the moment you start speaking about virtues, you are in time. And it's not like a thing, please select your today's set of values, for example. It's about much longer commitment and harder work. So I think, answering to your question, I think to the extent we would be or should be able, or we are able somehow to train us into this kind of virtue thinking attitudes, I mean, that would be a great step forward already.
But yes, please.
Yeah, I would like to add a few sentences to what Volodko said, especially at the end. I think why is so difficult, to answer a question why? Because I think the answer entails not only the change in the world, but also the change in yourself. Because actually it's not only about the distribution of resources, it is about how I will look like, in the future. So, and this requires some commitment. Also, and commitment is always, difficult thing. And because it's also connected to like responsibility. And without commitment, you could not acquire virtue, about which Volodko was talking just a minute ago. And I think because, changing one's identity is much more difficult than changing something in the world. So that's why so difficult to, answer this question, why I am doing it.
But it's a great question to start with, because very often, we cannot, in the end of the day, for a young person to think, am I good or not? Am I good enough? Actually, this is very often even to putting pressure question on young people. So maybe this question why can be, I don't want to oversimplify it right now, but maybe if we help our students, our graduates to ask this question why more often, then they can have better self-reflection. They can think about their purpose. and they can commit or not commit to better virtues or to the type of person they would like to become. And we can show them the whole process. So since you have microphone, Tarasa, I have a question to you now. So if we are having this conversation here right now, and we have heard in all of the speeches that actually last year and coronavirus, it did not bring probably not any new huge problem, it just made the already existing problems in the society, globally and locally, more vivid and more obvious. And the speed became so quick that it's scary. Sometimes it frightens. So maybe the problem is that we as universities, that we have been so conservative and traditional for so many years, that we were not changing. I mean, how we had to change over last year. So maybe we should look more critically at ourselves and not be the best of the best because we know our subject the best. But how we can reflect better, because it's not only about our students and graduates, how they reflect, but it's also how we reflect. I know it's a tough question, but...
Somehow, complexity theory has an answer to this question. I joke, but, really, when there is a complex situation and where there is also a complex institution with a long tradition, yes, with a long commitment to this tradition, I think it's important to create spaces for experimentation. And actually, universities also were very good at creating innovation. And many innovations come actually from universities, so they are able to balance both tradition and innovation, so past and future. And I think in our situation, when there is so much complexity in the world, the method of experimentation, giving more freedom to do something new, maybe it will not work out. That's also kind of as a result. And we know we will not go in this direction, I think would be a good course of action to pursue in such a situation.
What do you think, Orysya? Do we have to be best of the best and always keep our faces the best because somebody can write about it on the Facebook or Twitter or Instagram? Or how can we and be more fragile and allow ourselves to be more fragile?
Well, I think this is the really truth that we have to say to ourselves. We always are fragile. We've been fragile, and we since the university it's not about the buildings, it's about the community. And as a community, it's a living body. It transforms itself, the society transforms. And of course, the university, the propositions that universities has for the society have not even to respond to the society requests, but also kind of to go ahead a little bit, to try to guess what society requirements are. To be able to go ahead in a way to work as the mind of the society, to be analytical, to be able to shape the future. And I think one of the big questions of Ukraine's system for higher education is that our universities really are trapped in the system of this government ruled set of rules that was there from the Soviet time, and they are really big vessels that are really hard to change the direction, and that poses a lot of questions for not just for them but for the whole industry of education. And for UKU, Ukrainian Catholic University, I think we, from the very beginning, we are much more flexible in that, and that is a big advance of ours. It's really something that makes us forward just by virtue of not being connected to this really stiff system of education with the past, from the Soviet past. Therefore, I think it's just being always my recipe is very simple. It's always being really honest with yourself, to be able to say, not just to look at to see your stronger sides, but to see to be accountable of your own weak sides, and to be able to balance, to see the mission. The mission, actually, yes, the mission of this university is really important to keep in mind when you structure your future, when you do your job well.
And I'm sure that Vice-Rector of Mission has something to say here.
But I want to react on your phrase about changes. And it struck me that, that really is the case, that we live in a rapidly changing world. But let's ask ourselves, what is the subject of change? What is under change? It seems to me that, yes, political decorations, economic decorations are changing. We go from one epoch to another epoch. But there is one process which is the same in all ages. And this is the fight, the struggle between good and evil. And if we educate our students to distinguish between good and evil, to distinguish between truth and lie, then we enarm, how to say that in English, we make them ready.
Equip,
yes, equip them to be ready to challenge, to meet this challenge.
thank you. Of course, I have many more questions. I know we have one question from the audience. Yes, how can we will pass the mic?
Thank you very much, Sophia. My name is Viktor Poletko, and I'm a political science faculty here at the Ukrainian Catholic University. And just like Sophia, I have plenty of my own questions, but let me briefly assume that role of a backstage moderator and communicate the question from the audience. An excellent question, I think, in the first place addressed to Orysya, but the thoughts and insights of all the panelists will be most appreciated, I think. And this question comes from Svetlana Balinchenko. And so she is wondering whether that practice of open truth telling, of Paresia, it can be somehow passed on beyond the walls of the university, so that it does not become in a way elitist, so that it's not restricted to the universities and inaccessible to the rest of our populations. Let me now add my own increment to that question, whether that you think would be necessary, because we are now, and the pandemic shows that we are talking about the necessity of a stronger state, about perhaps censorship, some say, precisely because people who obviously lack competence, lack knowledge, but generate truth claims and enjoy the capability to generate the truth claims the way they wish. So is it the case, and that's my own question, not the question of Svetlana Balinchenko, is it the case that open truth-telling means that anyone should be given the possibility to say whatever he or she desires? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Svetlana for the good question. I definitely believe that university is not the only space for Paresia. I mean, who gave us the authority to say that we are the only space? I believe that Paresia is the practice of truth-telling. It's something that comes out from the, it comes from the internal integrity. It's something that grows, well, I was impressed when I read Foucault text. And as you know, Foucault was a secular philosopher. He never, you cannot accuse him of being very religious. And in the last years of his life, he raises the question of Christian paresia, the Christian martyrs, the Christian community as the ones that continues the paresiastic action through ascesis, through practice of improving oneself in spite of all situation. And so if I think as a university, we have kind of, our mission is to foster the islands of integrity, but we definitely cannot say that we are the only island of integrity. It's really, it will be really inspiring for us to know that our graduates are fostering the new islands of integrity whenever they come to work in the society, or whether this is state government or a private company or any social work or whatever they're doing. So I think we just, but as the Catholic University, I think we have this potential to be an island of integrity just for the sake of this identity that we have as a Christians. The understanding of what really is important for us. Now about your question, remind me slightly, because I was talking so much that I actually lost the...
Whether the necessity of the practice of open truth-telling
implies... yeah, thank you. I thought about that. This clubhouse is going to be really really wonderful field for new coaches of all kinds, new spiritual leaders of all types. And I think it's just the number of people that will come there to talk. Well, it's nice place to come and say something smart, but it's also a nice place to say something.
And there are lots of such people.
and I bet they will all come there. So it will really,
already there.
In my paper, I said it's transforming into bazaar, where everybody shouts, and you have to really discern, to use your own mind to see whether this is, you need an extra expertise to find out whether this man is or woman is really talking things or it's just production of for this as we there's a book famous about bullshit. Are we producing the bullshit again in a new way in a new social network? So I mentioned in my paper about this isegoria, just the freedom of speech for everybody, and that's not paresia. Paresia always comes out of moral duty, and isegoria comes out of I have a right to speak, therefore I will be speaking. So I think paresia requires this moral agency, and that's what really makes different. And so yeah, the threats are huge, but the
opportunities are also great.
Right, yes, absolutely agree.
So, dear friends, we have to wrap up because actually 1 hour and 30 minutes passed really quickly, at least for me. I hope for all the participants as well. And of course, I would like to hear some very short final remarks from all of you. And since all of you, almost all of you spoke about some kind of commitment, maybe you can say very quickly what kind of commitment you are ready to take to make our education better, to make Catholic education better, and how we can develop better and more people who have this moral duty. Very briefly, one commitment. I'm not easy, I know.
I has already mentioned one in my talk. So we are developing service learning pedagogy at the university. So I am trying to help to do that.
Well, thank you. I really would love that at our university and our universities, we kind of help students to develop their moral imagination, so to speak. And this is, to me, the way to ask why questions, not to get kind of focused exclusively on the hows or how question. So this would be, I think, this would be something I'm kind of ready to help to assist, just to go ahead with kind of moral imagination, and then somehow help just to be courageous enough to follow your moral imagination and become a moral agent. That's something that we started this panel with. Thank you.
Thank you, Orysya.
Bertrand Russell, a philosopher, said once that the philosophy is the no man's man in the middle of religion and science. And I really would like to think of philosophy and also about the university where that fosters thinking as the place of free and courageous speech, and so just really I see the big mission of ours, and still we have a lot of challenges, and that being able to make judgments on a daily basis is a big challenge that is ahead of us, and we have to be aware of that.
Thank you. I know it's almost immoral to take any commitments from you, Myroslav, but still, I have such a chance.
Well, my commitment is to provide a course in the worldview core at our university. We developed that, and I'm participating with my course, and my main task is to convince students that sacrifice is a legitimate mechanism of helping good to win even now. Because I remember...
So you're not a loser if you're sacrificing something.
I remember one young man in Kiev told me, Myroslav, sacrifice is a sign of your time. Now you have to apply to make a good application for some grant, receive money, and do what you want. So it's wrong. I'm sure that this is a wrong perspective. This is practical, but you cannot avoid sacrifice, and sacrifice is a legitimate mechanism.
Wonderful, thank you. I know Taras said that I have to prepare myself and also contribute something. So I think that for our society, the attitude that failure is okay is very important to broaden, to share, to cultivate, but also to be able to make conclusions from your failures, to reflect and to become better in the future. So that would be my contribution to that. Thank you very much to all the participants on this side of this discussion. Thank you to all listeners and contributors from other side, and I pass the microphone to Oksana.